Okay, it is very good to be here with you. I look around and I say I probably know about half the people here, maybe a little more. Church Day is very special to me. The energy and the drive and the focus on supporting these field members and the work and them building the kingdom, it's a very special thing to me to come here. I feel like as churches and as support teams, we kind of have three basic, I thought of three resources we have. Number one is God and His Word through His Spirit and the written Word He's given us. Number two might be history and looking at past efforts. But I think the big one that I'm here for is talking to brothers and sisters, and this happens at home, but now I'm broadening it out into people that from many different angles and heading in different places. People who are committed to the work and aren't quitting. And so we're encouraging each other on. It's a boost. It's collaborating together. So that's why I'm here. I'm talking about my journey, but when I get done, I want feedback from your journey. The times when we talk together at meals and stuff to me are priceless. That's where I'm learning from all of you. I would like to read some verses from Matthew chapter 6 that I have here in my notes. Matthew 6, verse 19 through 21. It says, "Lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth, where moth and rust doth corrupt, where thieves break through and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasure in heaven, where neither moth nor rust doth corrupt, and where thieves do not break through nor steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also." Now, all of you have heard these verses, and I typically think about them in terms of money and assets and things like that. I want to be talking mainly about time and brain space here today. That's the treasure that I feel like we can invest in. It's a heavenly treasure. Time is precious to us. We don't like to give it up, especially as support teams. So this is a little bit of my story of shifting how I think about how I use my time. I asked our support team, our ministry team, and the broader support team there at our church, what have you learned? And I got all these vague answers. So I heard things like, "Finally, it's starting to make sense. The fog is lifting." Another one said, "Patience. Our ideas need to be educated. We didn't know how to make it work." Another one said, "It took time to clear expectations, roles, and vision. Our vision wasn't connected to reality." I'm putting some of this a bit in my own words. One said, "My understanding of missions has expanded wider, but I still have many unanswered questions. We have learned to be more pragmatic." Another one said, "The difficult walk of being flexible but clear." There was one mentioned all the conversations and adjustments that we had to do. One of the kind of the one at the end that Brendan Miller, the guys on our team said, he said, "The sending church needs to dive in from day one with the field member in learning and absorbing what he's going through, what he's learning, what his expectations are." So to give you a background on that comment, our journey was a little unique. I met up with Daryl. His wife Rose was part of our church, was a member there. When they got married, they lived in Georgia for a while. He did some language study in Peru in 2010. They moved to Colombia in 2014. He was interested in least reached peoples for years before we took on our role. We came on board in 2017, where they became members of our church, and we dove in. So I would take it he had about at least a 7-year advantage on the rest of our team. And so we've been scrambling to catch up ever since. And Daryl being a visionary, that is a job. The other thing that's interesting about our journey is that Daryl is not focusing on a particular people group. He's supporting teams that are coming in to Columbia and going back out to places, coming down there to Leticia where he's at. And so he's toggling between many different needs, different people groups, different teams. And we up at home, if we aren't staying tuned in, we miss all the connections and the why and like that. So that's a little different maybe than some of you guys would be involved in. The other thing that was unique in our journey is they moved to Colombia and moved into Piedecuesta, which is a more populated area of Colombia, in 2014, and then moved to Leticia, which is way down on the Amazon, in 2019, and got a lot more involved. Okay, in the beginning, it would have been more involved in exploratory work, and when he moved to Leticia, he got a lot more involved in the actual logistics and helping the teams in a much more involved, close way. So that changed a lot of what he did. And again, as a team, we're trying to figure all that out. So like Aaron mentioned, he came down last summer, and we kind of looked at everything we've been doing and said, okay, what do we really want to focus on? We're just doing this shotgun, lots of different things. And we kind of narrowed it down to a much more of a support role, to the teams really honing in on that and trying to do that well, and that has really smoothed things out. That was one thing I think that really smoothed things out. Another one was Ron Miller. I don't know if he's sitting back here. He spoke last year about their journey. And some of his thoughts about trying to understand, how does this work? It looks impossible. God knows. Stand behind your team member. Those types of thoughts really helped. It was a relief for me to hear Ron speak. So maybe that's why I'm willing to talk today. I really appreciate his. If you guys have not heard that talk, you need to listen to it. It is helpful. We were, I think, as a support team, a little confused as to what we were. What is a support team? What is a sending church? And I looked on their website, on ABT's website, and they do describe what a support team is pretty clearly. Friends and family, they give us just a range of what the support could look like. Friends and family is not much accountability, little cohesion, not much structure or schedule, but tends to wane over time, so it's better for like a short-term trip or something. Short-term projects. A support team has a lot of close ties. They have a long-term relationship with the team member. They come alongside with input, questions, support, accountability, the things that Earl Burkholder was talking about. Lasting support, but it's tied to the field member, not to the ABT as a whole. A mission board, on the other hand, has a lot of more authority as an overseeing body, makes a lot more decisions for the field member, and the field workers from many churches, and they're managing a much bigger thing. So I think for us to understand what we were as a sending church and honing in on just that has really streamlined things. Also looking at ABT's values. Their balance between tradition and innovation and wanting to do both well. They're very humble and willing to learn. They know they're not adequate for the job, but they're also confident that if God says it needs to be done, then He will help us do it. Looking at that has been helpful to me. Their collaboration with many different people, not wanting to work alone, but willing to stand on convictions when needed to, has been very helpful to me to watch that play out. And they're clear on that in their values. But there's been times where I honestly just didn't know what we were doing. And I summarized, I think this was at the talk last summer that Darren talked about, summarized some of those things that just have to get done. They don't have to feel spontaneous. Spontaneous is for friends and family. We're a support team, so you do it anyway. Moral support, stand behind them, show interest in their spiritual well-being, learn with them at different ABT events, online teaching books. Make sure you understand their journey. Logistics, their health, their schooling, their housing, their taxes, make sure they're taken care of there. Finances, know their cost of living, their income, whatever unusual expenses they have. Pray with them, communicate with them, make sure they know that you're praying about their needs, stick with them. Communication, just talk about normal life. Make sure you know what normal life is like and they know what life is going on in your world. Don't drift apart. And then the reentry, the stress of coming back home, I think Rose's parents there have really stepped in every time they've been home. They have a place to stay, they have a vehicle, they have they're staying in there behind them. So that's been, that stuff is important. So if nothing else, get that done. But other things, what else have I learned? I would say a humble walk with God, wanting to work together as a team. And there's times that didn't always feel that way. But going alone, I'm convinced, is not going to take me far. I need the wisdom from God and the things I'm learning, but I also need wisdom from my church and the broader church. One of the things that I think is becoming clear is that the quirks of people on your team and in your church are probably indication of some kind of a unique gifting, and you could probably use that quirk. Some people just fit certain roles well, and there are some roles I just do not like on my role. There's parts I just don't get into. I let them do that. One thing, that feedback I got from Daryl, is that he likes to have a consistent long-term person that communicates regularly, is very interested in the work. When he talks about something, they know what he's talking about. He's diving deep, and he's at one point that will always respond if he needs something. He felt was critical. Beyond that, I would like for me to have, and we've tried to do this, is have about a 3-person team or 3 couples that have a very personal interest in it and understand that this is not a thought, it's not original from me, I think it's from Joe Root, that there's a difference between having missionaries from your church into the field and sending them. And they get it that they're responsible for those people. And having those same people over time where they can build their understanding, having that knowledge base is critical. They must enjoy reading, traveling, working together, conversations. Like this is your thing. I would say it almost needs to become a hobby for them. It needs to absorb some of their other hobbies need to go away, and you dive into this. I've seen a pattern where when you invest your time and your brain space, your heart goes with it, and you just feel like this thing needs to happen. I've seen that happen with all of us. One of our brothers from our church said that he found when the things that he didn't understand, he said, I can start a conversation and it dies. But when I understand, you feel like you just need to keep pushing it. I can't talk for a long period of time about something I don't understand. I've also seen a pattern where, and I've mentioned this before, where the field member is the visionary and the people coming along behind benefit from it. They're struggling to catch up. Or maybe they don't recognize they're benefiting from it. There's concepts that are useful in your home church. But the field member's almost always out ahead in the early days. At least that's our experience. Maybe not in yours if you're more proactive than we were. I would say in general, though, that you want your gap between the field member and the church, and especially the sport team, to start shrinking over time. You want to try to pull that together in your understanding. There will be people, though, that focus on the home church and are getting things done, and I've also tried to not resent that some people don't dive in. It's easy to get excited about it and be annoyed almost at those who are focusing on making sure the home church stays strong, and that's needed. This will not work without those people too. But keep them in the loop as much as you can. We've tried to bring the whole church along, though, with some updates and prayer requests and news. Try to build one concept on another. So we've done some regular meetings, just sharing news and some teaching. That takes discipline to try to come up with content. There's times we drop it for a while, and then we come back and do it again for a while. You need a pusher on your team to keep that alive. We have used a WhatsApp broadcast thing just to send links to different training, different teaching, different sermons, whatever, books, links to books. That has been helpful. One of the things that I think is different being on a support team that stood out to me is that the type of learning is different. So when I'm in a business setting, say I'm learning from my dad, I walk behind him, I learn from him. I go out and maybe sporadically pull stuff in, but a lot of it I learn on the job. And so everything I'm useful is I'm finding it locally and I'm just back and redoing it, if that makes sense. Where this type of thing, reaching unreached people groups, you're not going to find in your backyard. You're not going to learn it from your people that you work with every day, your family, your church. I'm not saying you can't learn anything from your church, but you're going to have to be more proactive than that. I feel like it's a little bit like where in Galatians 2, Paul talks about he was commissioned to go work with the Gentiles, and the other ones, they said that they were going to stay and work with the Jews. And I think there was this gap of understanding there that they didn't know what to do. So Paul had Gentile background or was familiar with it, so they sent him, and they caught up years later. I think we have the benefit of being able to share more, and we need to try to reach across that gap and find the Pauls and people like that that can help us across. I feel like in my personal journey, if you can imagine a pie chart of all the skills and understanding and knowledge, if you can imagine this little pie chart, and there's a slot that's related to reaching unreached people groups, and it's nothing that you're going to encounter in normal American life, or not much of it is. That's been my experience. I feel like I'm filling up that slot. I'm about 10 or 20% in. So when I finish up the rest of this talk, I'm talking about all the things on a 20% knowledge level, not an experienced knowledge level like the previous speaker this morning. I'm the amateur that's partway in. So I feel like I'm just filling up that slot, and I might use it someday. And I actually have found that a lot of the things I've learned have been useful in our home church. So that's something I've learned also. I would say expect to have a lot of conversations with your support team. and be slow to assume your field member's wrong. Like it doesn't sound right, it's just to label it wrong. One of the things I've found very helpful is give it some time for understanding to develop. And when there is something that you find like you can sense there's like this difference of ideas, that often the field member has taken some training or read a book or had some input that the support team has not. And the support team, in my experience, has been about the most useful thing for them to go listen to that book or that teaching or that read that book and find out what, actually have some speak, and then have your conversation from knowledge, from actual facts that you both looked at instead of just spitting personal ideas, personal experiences back and forth. To dive in deep enough that you can have an intelligent conversation. Like for instance, an example of that was Daryl Whitmer's talked many times about Mark Zook's, his sessions where he talks about church planting and chronological Bible teaching and teaching about animism, and I'd never watched all that stuff. So our family has started going through that, and I feel like, oh, that's why he said that 6 years ago, and I didn't dive into it. So that's an example where it's really helped pull together. One of our guys at church also mentioned to me that the support team needs to embrace the idea that books are where most of your training will come from. Maybe that's not completely, I don't know what percentage, but books are so valuable. So I would recommend look over the required reading for your field member, and the support team needs to start diving into that reading. I found that to be really helpful. If the cost of the books is an issue, the church probably could pay for them. If you don't like reading, I hear that a lot. I would say, well, our Bibles are in written form, so maybe God set a precedent. I don't know. Anyway. I would say you're going to, as a support team member, you're going to have responsibilities at home. You're not going to be able to travel all over the place and learn this thing on site and do places, but books are cheaper than plane tickets. They're cheaper than time off work. A $20 book is priceless if it helps you. But keep working slow and steady at it. I also I've come to understand that my view of the world was fairly small and simplistic before I got involved in here. It's probably still smaller than I realize. But if you think about what God did, so at Babel, man had this problem of arrogance, basically, and not listening to God. So he splits it up into, how many languages are there today? 7,000 or thousands. So he splits them up. This produces people groups. It produces beliefs and values and cultures that have been going on now for how many thousand years. And so there's completely different ways of thinking out there. And now we're going to go out here at the far end of that dispersion and hop across. And what it takes to get across that gap, why would we not want every tool we can get? Every bit of understanding, every bit of knowledge, every bit of training. But I guess what I'm advocating for is for our support team people, if you find something that's useful, sift through it, find the best things, and let people know what's useful. And I think ABT has been trying to do that, and I appreciate that. Another thing I'm thinking about being several years in is that we need to be, as a church, we need to be forward-thinking in what the needs might be in 3 to 5 years, not just immediate. Some of you probably are wired that way more than I am. But what knowledge, what experiences, what skills, what character do we need in our home churches so that we can support this cross-cultural ministry? If I can familiarize myself with what the field worker and their needs in their area, we can start encouraging people to gain knowledge and training so that when the need comes, like I've seen this happen multiple times where there's a need and we need it like in 3 months. There's no time to train people. Like we need somebody that has that understanding now in your church to go help. It could be language. It could be, Daryl's mentioned different times, English teaching would be useful. I've seen guys like the small engines stuff that's been going on in Columbia. Knowledge about electronics and medical stuff and Bible knowledge and willingness to sweat and suffer. All that stuff needs to be developing in the church. Some of our families have traveled down to Columbia and know Spanish. That's been tremendously helpful when they visited. I didn't get that done. I still haven't got it done. I wish I had invested in that 3 to 5 years ago before we got as busy as we are now. The other thing this is something that kind of caught me by surprise. It shouldn't have. But I've seen the value of these concepts filtering into my children and in other children in our church. So all this teaching and books and training and stuff, if you let your children listen to it and encourage them to listen to it, is it's going to start shaping their view of success and values, and they start seeing God's kingdom and God's covenants, and they understand about other languages and Bible translation and church planting and what that is. If you do a chronological Bible study with them, and ABT has pushed for this way of looking at the Bible, like they have a sense of where they fit in the story. If you can put up maps or timelines on the wall where they know their place and their time and where they're at, is really helpful. Just remind your children you're not the only people in the world. Like my children were listening to Zulu the other day, and if you ever listen to a language like that, it reminds you that they're really, what God did at Babel is fascinating. The click languages and all their stuff that they can do. I think it has really helped my journey as a parent from the stuff my children have been exposed to in the last 5 years in this work, for them to understand who they are and where they're headed. Another thing I've tried to do is study into the country that Daryl and Rose are working in. So in our case, it's Colombia. With you, it'd be a different one. So I read a bit about their colonial past, about the rubber boom in the early 1900s and some of the terrible things that happened then. The rise of the leftist groups in the 60s, like the FARC and the ELN, some of the right-wing paramilitaries that fought back. Studied about the coca trade, the effects on the community, how that trade actually works, why people get pulled into it. I've tried to look at maps of the towns and rivers, so when there's conversations going back with Daryl about different teams going places, I actually know when a town, like I can place it, I can know what river they're on. I don't know them all, but it's just to give a sense of connection there. Their travels by river and air and not by road, so that really changes how you get around the country. There's many animistic beliefs. I think it's helpful to be familiar, at least to some degree, with that. In our case in Colombia, there's many anthropologists that are trying to preserve those animistic beliefs. And they actually have some websites you can cruise around on and you can learn. They have maps of what they're doing, and that's been it's informative about what's happening there. I tried to look at maps of the different language groups, people groups in Colombia. I've heard stories of the many unfinished works in different groups that are partially reached, and then the work dies out for various reasons. Want to know why that happened. Why you need permission and favor to get into some communities. That's just things that I've bumped into. A fascinating story. This is an example of something when you start digging around. And so there was a book that somehow we got that was a little paperback book by Lambert Anderson about the work with the Ticuna people. They're just upstream there from Leticia. And he talked about his work. This is the story that happened in the 50s. The book, I think, was printed in the 70s. This tattered paperback, and I read it and put it on the shelf. And then Daryl calls me up one day and says, can you call Lambert Anderson? And there's some Ticuna Bibles that are finally gotten printed. And I'm like, I read a book about that one time or other. So this is the guy that him and his wife went in there in the 50s. They worked on Bible translation, and probably some other people too. So this is 2020. Well, this was 2022, I think, when I called him. He said, yeah, the Bibles are in Lima. They're getting shipped down over to Quito, and they're going to come down the river. And anyway, Daryl went to their dedication of their final complete Ticuna Bible just a few weeks or a month or so ago. And he brought some back to Leticia, and he had them there in the house. I went and visited the other week, and I picked up this Bible. I'm like, this is the finished work from 1957 or whatever it was. Like, wow. I felt like I was holding some little priceless thing here, you know. But it was special because I had read the book a long time before, and then this was 70 years from the time the work started till they had the finished Bible. They dedicated it. That's endurance. One thing I would really want to, and I'm excited to hear this is happening with some of you, is that we've been going through ABT's church planting course as a team, and it has been a tremendous blessing looking at the different modules. I won't go through all of them here. We're just starting into Module 4 on community development. But that has opened up all kinds of conversations on our team and with people there at church. It tends to dominate a lot of conversations after church, at least among some of us. It is a great way to bridge concepts and stuff with your team. If you haven't done it, dive in as soon as you can. I would expect if at all possible, try to do the comprehensive. We're finding it takes 16 hours plus to go through it. But I think some people are smarter than we are, and they're getting through it quicker, a month. But it has been a tremendous blessing.
That makes me feel better. Thank you.
Okay. Yes. There's no way I could do comprehensive in 8 hours. There's too much there. It's rich. It's so good. Other things I've learned, I'll keep stepping here. The value of communicating God's message and really wanting to be a communicator. The whole idea of being able to talk and hear what someone else is hearing through their worldview grid from Steve Sanford. I heard that from him years ago. The interactive question asking teaching style comes through in various chronological Bible teaching sessions I've heard. I was at an oral engagement training thing at CAM out there in Ohio, and they were pushing that idea of having really a lot of engagement with the people you're teaching. So you can kind of feel out where they're at and what their comprehension is. That was something that I've really found useful in our home church. We did a Creation of Christ study back in 2019 into 2020. We used the Firm Foundations curriculum. I think CAM now has one. That study felt painfully slow. We were going through lesson by lesson once a week or whatever it was, and it felt so many things I already knew, I thought. But what I found was that over time, I start seeing broader principles, like God's covenant and how he works with people, God's values. You see relentless consistency, like sin never pays. God always protects his people. He will always preserve his people. God's people must respond to him. If you don't respond to God, if you're not in a responding state of mind, everything unravels. You start seeing big picture things. And I think it helps me to push back against kind of a fatalistic mindset, like, oh, it's not worth trying. You start seeing that God works over longer periods of time and does correct course with people. A lot more thoughtful way of approaching the Bible. And one thing that's fascinating to me is that, and this is I think about with my children, is that I can as if I'm teaching through like Bible stories, I can, if they have an idea, if I see an attitude coming through, and this happens in a bigger picture too, but you can target that attitude or that false belief with a specific story. You can attach principles to stories, and they know how it all fits. So I really like that. I've really benefited from that. I've learned about community development and how sin creates an enormous amount of problems in the world, many practical ones. I've heard different teachers teach about how community development can kind of be a subtle way of introducing new ways of thinking that introduce cause and effect, course correction, reflection. That's been kind of very much of an eye-opener to me. How to assess whether a need is critical or if it's a long-term chronic thing really changes how I've looked at how I can provide help in practical settings. This is something I don't think I did very well before, to map out all the assets before you try to figure out any solutions. Like slow down and actually write down the assets you're working with. And I had no idea that you could use small engine repair, medical knowledge, agriculture, wood gas, electronics, and savings groups and money handling to bring the good news in as tools in so many ways. Some lessons are just taught better in the field, in the shop. Take Jesus everywhere. One thing I have noticed is that development is a mindset that our field workers trained in, and most of our support team have not grown up thinking that way, and that slow development way of thinking. We like to just make things happen. We look around, we've got money, we've got people, our solutions are much more pointed and kind of imposing. Other things that we've studied a fair amount as a support team, what animism is, and that's about the space between the natural world, and we have Creator God, and the middle ground there in between that a lot of people in the world see. That was something I did not understand. And how much different animism is, much more manipulative and appeasement-based, and our relationship with God, what he wants is relationship, trust, absolute loyalty, single focus on him. He is the answer for everything. It's a completely different way of living life. Animism, this is one thing that stood out from our last church planning course. We were just going through animism in the last one, and how much animism is an essence that kind of fills any religion, any religious system. And I started seeing animistic ways of thinking in our culture right around us there in our hometown, in Floyd. It truly fits in anywhere. Different other things, this is kind of a scattershot. It's just things, what I'm describing are things that I feel like I have just broadened my world. And the involvement with supporting Daryl and Rose have introduced ideas to me that have just, I see what God is doing, and I feel like I've just been blessed beyond, even if, okay, this isn't accurate, but if there were no unreached people groups out there and there was no bigger picture, I'm still blessed. Like, I know that's the bigger goal, but it has benefited me. Simple things like you have the phonetic alphabet and studying how your mouth and how you make different consonants and vowels and things like that. And so like when we connect those sounds and the vibrations in air coming through to sounds, to words, and that created, the way God ordered all that at Babel has really created all the stuff we interact with in the world, all the people groups and languages and nations. Literacy is a gift from God. Reading really is freedom. I said that before. But people that don't have literacy, it's a very different world. I've been humbled to understand that I'm a product of a culture, and I really don't think, feel, or do a whole lot that my culture didn't tell me was okay to do. It really is true. And so I'm not a very original person at all. I didn't come up with very much on my own. This is something that I think has broadened my world probably more than anything through this, is that I've learned that God knows the future. He is shaping things, and when we pray, we're aligning ourselves and accepting what He is getting done, and He is getting things done. Different times when there have been teams, the More Hearts and different ones have been out doing some things, and our churches try to get people to pray, and I see how God's provided favor, how God's opened doors, He's protected, and I see God moving in ways that I just miss in the humdrum of normal life. It is really, my view of God has grown through prayer. We have prayed for teammates for Daryl and Rose for over 4 years, and God hasn't made that happen yet. So when that gets answered, I think my view of God will grow again, because it's going to be good when it happens. So probably to finish up with, I would say that, in all this, two things. I will say one is that I feel like I really enjoy strategizing and learning and absorbing all information. But one thing I learned, I'm seeing happen too, is that God can use just about anything for His work. So this is just probably a small story. But I was down in Leticia a few weeks ago, on 1st of May, and me and Daryl were just riding around town on a motorcycle. I was behind him, and he was just showing me around what's where and all that. And okay, we've been chattering via, he's either been in the States or I've been chattering via WhatsApp for years. And we're going down towards the port, down the river, and it just dumps rain. I mean, there's just water everywhere. And the streets there just fill up with water, and it's a really weird feeling to ride along behind someone on a you're on the motorcycle with them. And we're driving on a dry street, and we're dodging potholes and sinkholes and stuff, and we're all down bumpity-bump, and then it pours, and you're riding in this much, it felt like a lot of water. And so you don't know where anything is, and he's like, well, I think it's better on the left side. Over here, we might go under. Riding across the lake on a motorcycle, it felt like a lake on a motorcycle, was a really unnerving feeling. He got through, we didn't sink. We got back to the house, and we were just talking about things, and he said, you know what, I think I have a friend. And I thought, wow, I've thought about that ever since. So he's out there sweating, he's out there surviving, their whole family is. They need somebody just to come down there and sweat with them and ride and do things with them. So I admire some of you who have spent time with your field members over there and showing up and sweating with them, suffering with them, talking, praying, crying. That's important. A little short thing, if somebody's a new team member, a support team that's forming, and they wonder, what do I do first? I would say, if you do nothing else this year, do the church planning course from ABT right off the bat. It's a great overview of what your field member's learning. It isn't difficult as far as like you can do it. It just takes way more time than I expected to do it well. But for us, it's created a lot of launch pads off into other conversations, but you tend to work off a solid understanding instead of just speculation. Next thing I would do is sit down with your field member and make a list of all the teaching required reading. And I'm not saying you can do all of it, but at least if you know what it is specifically, you can start seeing what you can absorb. Study the target people group or the country, their language, culture, history, beliefs, practical life, maps, whatever you can learn about the country. It just helps you. It's helped me tremendously to be able to keep up with conversations. Do a chronological Bible study, persevere till it makes sense. And ask ABT if there's anything stateside you could go to, if one or two of your team every year could do. We did Wyoming last spring for 3 days. That was a tremendous blessing. It's going to end up benefiting you. It's going to benefit the home church. We need that vision beyond just normal everyday life. I believe the expansion of the kingdom of God is the most compelling vision we can get involved with. Let's share it. Let's invest in it. It is. To me, I've found it is very true where I've put my invested in where my treasure is, my heart follows. So that's been a bit of my story. God is good. Let's keep doing it together. I really do value your feedback from all of you who are in the same journey. I want to learn from you too. Thank you.
Thank you, Eldon. And I've seen it developing, I think, in Eldon the last few years, and he gave me words for it here. I think he has a new hobby. Maybe it's more than a hobby. I think it's probably more than a hobby, but it felt a little bit like what we just did here was give him a chance to talk about his hobby to us here for a while. So, that was very. I feel a bit speechless, but humbled and encouraged by your sharing there. All right, we have 2 roving mics again. So what are your questions and responses?
What would you say are things as field members that you as a support team would want to see? Like, what types of things does the support team feel encouraged by or want to see? Do you have any specific points?
In a lot of ways, it's hard for the person in the field to understand what it feels like on the other end, and probably vice versa. So anything you can communicate back to us, small victories, whatever challenges you're facing. Like, I think in a lot of cases, support teams want to help. They just don't know where to start and what to do. So that's why I'm saying, like, if anything you can communicate about the setting there and how we can be useful. What things do we need to be learning about? I guess for me, I just felt like I came into this with almost no knowledge of indigenous church planting or in say 2015, 16. And so to try to get up to speed is anything you can feed back to there and then show how God is working there's a lot of motivation to, I don't know. I'd have to think on that a while. To follow up on that, I've really been blessed by the people that Darren Rose have put us in connection with, which like you guys down there in Alabama, Ben Sullivan, Matthew Moreharts, different team members. Knowing what's going on in the broader effort like this has been tremendously encouraging to me.
Yeah, thanks, Eldon. That's really powerful. If I was in the shoes of a support team leader or member here sitting here, I'd be wondering, so how many hours a week does this hobby take you on average?
It goes in fits and starts. It really does. I mean, you have to remember these things are, okay, two things. One is we started in 2017. This is 2023. I really haven't learned. I mean, I'm telling you, like all this range of things, and this is what I was concerned about, is that you're only 10 or 20% in, or maybe 5%, I don't know. But one of the things I was going to say is that Linwood Hirschberger was a brother on our team. I'll give him credit for a lot of this. He would call me up and say, hey, there's this Wyoming or this, I forget, these different trainings or what events, whatever, and he would pull me there. He was kind of the instigator, and I followed him around. So probably have a single guy on your team that has lots of spare time, that has a drive and vision would be good. That really did make a difference. He was the one that started our chronological Bible study. Yeah. That's what I'm saying, like, the people on your team who have those kind of little niches like that sometimes can make all the difference. And Linwood was a pusher and driver to keep it going.
Last call.
It's not a question, it's more of a response, but I want to publicly bless my church and the support I felt. It's been amazing. I had a brother on our support team that flew out, him and his wife, to visit the school in Chicago with us. And the same brother ended up flying with me when we were looking at housing. And the amount of support is just immense. We're not a very big church, but I'd say half or maybe a third of the adults are taking the church planning course with us. And obviously our support team is much smaller, but there's other members that could be support members as well, in just the way their response is, and that means a lot.